Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. It's Friday, February 2nd, 2018, and this is our weekly Country Roads with Winston Shrout. I don't have much of a voice today, but I'm going to do the best I can. Today, let me welcome Winston. Welcome back, Winston. How are you?
Well, done pretty good. Isn't today Groundhog's Day?
It is, and I did hear that it's only 6 weeks left of winter. How about you? What'd you hear?
Oh, I didn't hear anything, but Groundhog's Day is always an interesting time of year.
You know, it's sunny here on the East Coast at the moment. It was raining all night, but it's sunny now, and I guess Punxsutawney Phil saw a shadow. That's a good thing.
Uh-oh.
So a shadow means only 6 more weeks of winter, and I'm okay with that. We're going to be talking today about a few topics, including topics and individuals that surround issues that pertain to the IRS, and we're going to talk about fiduciary responsibility. And of course, we're also going to talk about the story and what happened with Lavoy Finnegan and how we can't let this happen again, and how we need to remember what happened in his case. So, that's what we do these country roads about, informing all of us so that we can take personal responsibility and stop the tyranny, really. So, Winston, we'll get moving along, and I know you have a couple of things to start with before we move into that.
Yeah, I thought maybe we start out first with some funny stories. Again, picking on the poor Irish, but we actually some of these stories, you find them other places with other ethnic groups and stuff like that. But anyway, it's kind of fun to go over some of these things.
Is it a riddle? Is it a riddle for me, Winston?
No, no
Okay, good. Although I can't get over that elevator one. That was so good. I usually can't tell that one.
Yeah, I know. I thought we'd just start out with some funny stuff today. I'm fixing to tell some pretty disgusting things here in a minute. So we need to start out with a little bit of a laugh to kind of get things. Anyway, these are attributed to the Irish, but many of these stories you see them other places. Anyway, we like to pick on the Irish.
Yep.
And I can do that. My mother's eyes were green, so I can pick on the Irish. Anyways, first it says, so this is a pharmacist talking to this fellow. He says, "Oh, Holleran," asked the pharmacist, "did that mud pack I gave you to improve your wife's appearance?" And all Holleran says, "Well, it surely did, but it keeps falling off."
Oh no, Winston. Is your wife home? Is she hearing you? Oh, that's why you're doing this. Okay.
Anyway, the next one says on St. Patrick's Day, an armed hooded robber burst into the Bank of Ireland and forces the teller to load a sack full of cash. On his way out the door with the loot, one of the brave Irish customers grabs the hood and pulls it off, revealing the robber's face. The robber shoots the guy without hesitation. He then looks around the bank to see if anyone else has seen him. One of the tellers is looking straight at him, and the robber walks over and calmly shoots him also. Everyone by now is very scared and looking down at the floor. "Did anyone else see my face?" screams the robber. There's a few moments of silence when one elderly Irish gent looking down tentatively raises his hands and says, "I think me wife may have caught a glimpse."
Oh no! Oh, Winston, that's terrible.
All right, just a couple more.
That's pretty funny, though.
Oh, they're just funny little things.
They are funny.
Anyway, walking into the bar, Seamus said to O'Hare, the bartender, "Pour me a stiff one. Just had another fight with the little woman." "Oh, be jabber," says O'Hare. "And how did this one end?" "Ah, when it was over," Seamus replied, "she came to me on her hands and knees." "Really?" cried O'Hare. "Now that's a switch. What did she say?" "She said, 'Come out from under the bed, Seamus, you little chicken.'" All right, this next one.
Winston's laughing too much because you're just like you can relate to this too much, Winston.
It's
It's quite
funny
funny.
stories. Like I say, you know, when you start off something as serious as we're going to get into, it's good to have a little bit of laugh to get our blood flowing.
Yep.
Anyway, this last one says Dermot and Patrick are standing at the base of a flagpole looking up. Rita walks by and asks them what they're doing. And Patrick answers, we're supposed to be finding the height of this flagpole, but we don't have a ladder. Rita takes out an adjustable wrench from her handbag, loosens a few bolts, and lays the flagpole down. She raises a tape measure, or she finds a tape measure in her pocket, takes a few measurements, and announces that the flagpole is 18 feet 6 inches. Then Rita walks away. Dermot says to Patrick, now isn't that just typical? We ask for the height and she gives us the length.
It's pretty good. That's funny. Thanks, Winston.
Yeah, anyway, it's just, you know, like I say, a few chuckles, you know, to get us warmed up a little bit. Like I say, you know, laughter is the best medicine. And so sometimes it's good to have a little bit of a chuckle to, you know, keep us centered. And so I like, you know, with all the serious and terrible things and troubled times we're going through right now, you know, it'd be important for folks to take a few minutes, you know, think of something funny or humorous that might lighten things up, so you don't go into negative energy. Now, what we're fixing to talk about here presently is something, you know, I had mentioned last time, and I said the wrong words. I mean, I had referred to a particular individual as Gordon Call. It's not Gordon Call. Gordon Hall. Sorry, excuse me, Gordon Hall. As far as I know, Gordon Hall is alive. So if anybody heard that and was wondering about Gordon's situation, you know, I misspoke the word. The name I wanted to refer to was Gordon Kahl, Kahl. Now, this is an incident that happened some number of years ago. You know, some of the old timers might remember this. And so I thought I might refer to this story because it's in the same category as Waco, as Ruby Ridge, and some of these others. But this one is so disgusting. And it started out again with the IRS. That's how it started. So let me just screen share. I have this article, and it's on the internet. You can find it. Let's see here. Did that one come up? The uncensored Gordon Call story?
Only your directory.
Oh, the directory? Okay, hold on then.
Directory is up, yeah.
Must have done it wrong. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, let's do it this way. Not really that good. How about that?
Yeah, uncensored Gordon Call. Okay, the uncensored.
Yeah, this particular story was posted on the Rumor Mill News. I think some of you viewers may have, you know, are familiar with Rumor Mill News.
Yes.
They put out a lot of information over the years. So it starts out, this apparently was posted in 2000, 18 years ago. And the story even goes back much, much further than that. It goes back to 1968.
Oh.
Anyway, they start out their article, well, it's tax time again. And for those of you who don't remember or never heard the story, the editor here is saying that they want to recount this, you know, so that people would remember. Because this is, you know, it never got to play that Waco got or Ruby Ridge or any of those kind of things, but it was just as traumatic Matter of fact, disgusting. Anyway, this is called the Uncensored Gordon Call story. It says in 1968, tax protester Gordon Call stopped filing IRS 1040 income tax returns. For 9 years thereafter, the IRS ignored him. Now, let me just put in right here that this Gordon Call was, in fact, a farmer, and he never made enough income to actually be required to file.
Hmm.
Okay, now get that, understand that right away.
Okay.
Anyway, so he decided he'd stop. But in 1977, after Gordon Call spoke on an evening radio show regarding the illicitness of the income tax, some 250 phone calls would come into the radio station over the next 2 days, either support or pledging never to file another tax return. With that, the IRS came down on Call like a ton of bricks. They quickly assembled a case against him, and 2 weeks later threw a criminal prosecution against him for violating Title 26, willful failure to file. Gordon Call was a low-income farmer, not even meeting minimal statutory standards for threshold income tax levels achieved before being required to file a 1040. But that was not about to stop the IRS, who was good at changing the facts by creating facts. Convicted and incarcerated, went out of Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary on parole. Call left the Texas Judicial District he was confined to by claiming that some of the restrictive orders were defective. He soon moved to North Dakota. Criminal summons issued from the federal court in Midland, Texas, was served on Gordon Call in 1980, charging him with a misdemeanor. Call responded by informing the court he would not be appearing, and the matter was allowed to be deferred until March of 1982, when the Justice Department obtained a federal arrest warrant citing his parole violation. Then that warrant was held up again until 82, when it was sent to the U.S. Marshals in Fargo, North Dakota, in February of 1983. The United States Marshals and the federal court in Texas knew of his whereabouts in North Dakota at all times. After a 2.5-year delay in the case, the fact there was a problem controlling the prosecution of the case is self-evident. Then it talks about what is, this, that, and the other about bureaucracy. But anyway, it says, once again, Gordon Call had attracted the attention of the United States government, with the personality known as Ronald Reagan acquiescing indifferently as president, and with William Smith sitting as the Attorney General. The word came down the pipeline to get rid of Gordon Call, and the stage was set for the kind of confrontation the feds wanted. A violent attack was planned against Gordon Call at his farmhouse, and it was going to be well publicized. You see, they're going to publicize this to show everybody in America just how powerful the government was against someone who wasn't even required to file a 1040.
These are the wardens, yeah.
Yeah.
The wardens.
The attack would be in the form of a roadblock. It would be in the evening hours, and it would occur in a remote rural area.
Sound familiar?
The timing of the attack in February of 83 was selected to coincide with the trials of other related criminal prosecutions then going on that would be favorably tipped toward the government, as the juries were exposed to what be surfacing visibly on the news as the Gordon Call incident. From his farm in Heaton, North Dakota, both Gordon Call, along with his neighbors, and the chief of police of Medina, North Dakota, Darrell Graff, all had received several advance notices that the U.S. Marshals were planning a very unpleasant reception for Gordon Kahl. And in the case of Darrell Graff, he was bluntly told to stay out of it. Now, again, this Darrell Graff is the chief of police in that near city. Rather than meet his adversaries face to face to settle the grievance at that lower level, Gordon Kahl improvidently ignored the gathering storm and tossed aside the warrant, thus giving his adversaries the benefit of intensifying the impending confrontation into an elevated status, a level that originates out the barrel of a gun, where the feds were quite likely to prevail. Although that did not give the United States Marshals the right to come out first and shoot Kahl, it does, however, require that other people in difficult positions with juristic authorities facing contemplated extermination itself should not replicate Gordon Kahl's modus operandi. In other words, they're saying, Gordon made a pretty bad choice about how he handled it.
Okay.
Anyway, in February '83, Gordon Kahl, accompanied by his wife and son, Yori, left the meeting in Medina, North Dakota, and headed home. Gordon Kahl was under surveillance, and they knew it. They knew he was in that meeting. They knew he was in town. Yet their surprise party was going to be executed in some remote, country road someplace. He could have been picked up at the meeting, but the feds had a surprise for him and wanted the remoteness of a rural environment. His son Yori detected something adverse and dangerous in the air, so Yori, the son, took his father's jacket and cap and wore those on himself on the ride home that afternoon. Not far from his farmhouse, a roadblock had been set up by U.S. Marshal Kenneth Muir. It was a very unusual roadblock in that it had an ambulance and a fire truck waiting. They give you an idea of what they're, planning or expecting.
It's terrible.
The marshal had not come to arrest, but to murder, bringing neither the arrest warrant nor any identification. Deputy Muir brought his gun and orders to terminate Gordon Kahl. Arriving at the roadblock, Gordon's son Yori fled the pickup truck and ran to a nearby telephone pole for cover. Thinking that Yori was his dad Gordon, Marshal Muir opened up the shooting by firing several shots at Yori. He didn't shoot anybody. Yori did not fall to the ground quick enough to satisfy the killer marshals, so Marshal Muir kept on shooting until Yori fell. After spending a while at the hospital, Yori Kahl would actually survive to be charged with murder and later convicted by a jury in the Star Chamber that was highly pressured by the U.S. Marshals and had numerous other fatal irregularities. In other words, they said it was a phony Star Chamber trial. Anyway, back at the roadblock, after seeing his own son cut down by Marshal Muir, in other words, he saw the guy shoot his son.
Right.
Gordon Kahl grabbed the gun and let Marshal Muir have it, killing him and Deputy Marshal Robert Cheshire. Injured was Deputy Marshal James Hobson. Staying in the background, looking at all this shooting and profanity being thrown about, was Chief Darrell Graff, who was the chief of police in Medina, who was told in advance the Kahl was going to buy the farm and he was to stay out of it. Gordon went over to the telephone pole, dragged his son Yori, white with blood loss and bleeding profusely, over to an unmarked police car and drove him to a hospital in Medina. And then Gordon Kahl took off into the night. It says soon a swarm of military stormtroopers descended on Fargo in military clothing and using military trucks. Huh? They sent the military in? They were on the search and destroy orders. Gordon Call immediately was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list and was the subject of the most extensive fugitive search in the history of the FBI. It was a massive operation. A type clampdown was put out in North Dakota, accompanied with extensive random stops of motor vehicles, but nothing ever turned up. For Gordon Call, thousands of armed forces were called into the search surrounding North Dakota countryside. Every available private bounty hunter known to the FBI was hired and put on the case, but Call managed to slip through it all. In comparison to what they can do when they feel like it is worthwhile noting how J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI never showed any such interest in capturing known fleeing killers when President Kennedy was shot in Dallas. Now, did they? No roadblocks, no dragnets, no manhunts, no searching, nothing but CIA agents carrying Secret Service credentials, blah, blah, blah about the grassy knoll stuff. Anyway, for the next 3 months, Gordon Call had found a home with some friends, a Mr. and Mrs. Ginter and a Mr. Russell, who kept moving him quietly from house to house. It was rather obvious to anyone that if he was ever found, he would be killed immediately. They weren't looking to arrest him. They were looking to kill him. In time, Mr. Russell's daughter noticed that her father was hiding Gordon Call. And so anyway, she went to the FBI, spilled the beans. She would give him $25,000 reward and a promise of immunity. The rural house where Gordon Call was staying was placed under FBI surveillance, but the results were inconclusive. On the morning of June the 4th, a special FBI team of animals and savage killers,
Gee whiz,
known as the FBI SWAT team, left their home base in Washington, D.C., and flew into Lawrence County, Arkansas on a private FBI jet. That's where Call was at that time, in Arkansas. There they were met by local FBI agents, other FBI agents, Arkansas State Police, the Sheriff of Lawrence County, Arkansas, his deputies, and the confluence of U.S. Marshals assembled from across the country.
unbelievable.
Several marshals invited to the Call execution operation arrived too late and missed it. Later in the afternoon, it all began. The quiet, isolated, and remote house was cordoned off. Roadblocks were set up, and all without Gordon Call detecting anything amiss. Soon that afternoon, Mr. Ginter left the house alone, and he was stopped down the road. He claimed his wife, Norma, was in the house alone. Now, the house where Gordon Call was living was more closely surrounded, and Sheriff Gene Matthews went to the front door to remove Mrs. Ginter from the scene. With her out of the way, the FBI started open shooting. They started shooting at the house and saturated the house with bullets. But the earth shelter was made with concrete walls, and Gordon Call survived through it all without a scratch. The 36-year-old local sheriff, Gene Matthews, was killed incidental to the FBI siege on the Gordon Call hideout. Now, it doesn't say who shot the sheriff. Was it friendly fire or what? It doesn't really say.
Right.
After a while, as the firing stopped, the FBI cordoned off the house for themselves while Delta Force.
Jesus.
My God Almighty.
For not paying taxes, man. Phew, people.
After a while, the firing stopped, and the FBI cordoned off the house for themselves while the Delta Force animals converged on the house like starved panthers going for a piece of meat. They found Gordon Call alive and well inside the home, hiding behind the refrigerator. He was taken to the living room, thrown on the floor, and was worked over with the butt end of their rifles. While numerous bones were being fractured and his teeth were being smashed in, other members of Delta Force went on a rampage in the house, smashing pictures, television set, overturning furniture, and taking a fireman's axe and chopping up a bookshelf. While Gordon Call was pinned to the floor by the 6 to 8 federal Panthers, still under attack from the gun butts, the FBI agent with the fireman's axe turned to Gordon Call himself and chopped off his hand. Then he went around and chopped off Gordon Call's other hand, and then both of his feet were severed. While screaming in pain and with blood gushing out profusely over the floor where his hands and feet used to be, Gordon Call was shot in the head at close range, killing him. When people viewed Gordon Call's dismembered body, they became nauseous and sick. And the neighbors, some of the local people said, that's not Gordon Call. That's Mr. William Wade, who was the owner of the land and resembled Gordon Call closely. And then there was confusion because of what the neighbors were saying was, that's not Gordon Call. You just killed, this other fellow over here. Now they got a problem. Now they got a real problem. So they were afraid that Gordon Call had slipped away. Local residents monitoring the operation on the police radio band heard a call made for some gasoline to be delivered to the house.
Oh, man.
Now that the murder of Gordon Call had been botched, as they supposed, the feds were going to cover their own tracks and torch the place. The Delta Force animals left the place with extensive blood stains covering their clothes and took the private FBI jet back to Washington. The roadblocks were called off when Mr. Wade, the owner of the land, showed up in town alive and well. So they hadn't murdered the wrong guy. They had murdered Gordon Call. The dismembered body was later identified as being that of Gordon Call, but the bodies and the house were only lightly. They set fire to the house to try to burn up the evidence. Because they thought they killed the wrong guy. See? So they were trying to cover up the evidence by burning the place down.
Right.
Unfortunately, it didn't work so well because it was not a wooden house. I mean, the roof and everything was probably made out of wood and whatnot, but the house itself was basically concrete. Anyway, the dismembered body was later identified as being that of Gordon Call, but the bodies in the house were only lightly charred since the house was fabricated from cast concrete walls and the fire never got that intense. The corpse identified as being Gordon Call's with missing teeth, hands, feet, and had a bullet hole in the head. And was extensively covered with tissue, bruises, and fractured bones. It was very shocking and disgusting as people saw photographs of Gordon Call's charred remains taken by the coroner and reported a stark and terrifying look on his charred face, but he had died in extreme terror, screamingly violently from the pain. The man who was director of the FBI at the time that this murder operation was being performed was William Webster. He personally supervised it. And when you get to know William Webster very well, you will become acquainted with the great murderer. Gordon Call was later buried with military honors, whatever that meant. His wife back in North Dakota received several mean and ugly death threats from the feds to keep quiet or be murdered herself. Meanwhile, the rest of the country went on like Alice strolling through Wonderland, believing that all was well and that the federal government is your trusted friend, that some little tax protester over there got what he deserved. Back in Arkansas, while sifting through the smoldering ruins in the kitchen, a reporter for the New York Times, accompanied by Ray Wade, the landowner's son, found Gordon's Call left foot that had been chopped off by the axe. It was taken to the local coroner in Little Rock, confirmed as being Gordon Call's sliced off foot. However, this was news not fit to emphasize, and the reporter's story was blurred, over which, anyway, the story that this reporter would have liked to put out didn't go out the way he wanted it. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Ganner, who had been harboring Gordon Call, were charged not only with aiding and abetting a fugitive, but were also fraudulently charged with the murder of Sheriff Matthews. At trial, the only evidence that introduced against them outside of the background story was the first-person evidence from Art Russell's daughter, who reported to the jury that she had seen what she had seen her father do. And that eyewitness evidence, Beginners and Art Russell were convicted and sentenced to protracted incarceration in federal penitentiary. In conclusion, notes that a large volume of the continuous reporting that the New York Times and Time magazine did on the story from February through October was based, as usual, on the mere replication of whatever the FBI and wire services had told them as the government billboards that they are, so their reporting is highly edited, inaccurate, and distorted news. Be advised that there are numerous inconsistencies in those articles between what they have reported, as the feds are quite good at changing the facts, and what is reported herein in this article. Until their own reporter, J.C. Barden, actually went to the torched house to dig at facts for himself on the case, some of the real facts never surfaced, and his reported factual deaths considerably changed the character and color of the savage FBI animal attack on Gordon Call. Incidentally, Mr. Ray Wade, who found Gordon Call's foot, was also threatened with being killed himself if he did not remain silent, as were other local residents who also saw different aspects of the bloody reign of FBI terror that went on during that fateful day, as the FBI once again allowed itself to be defiled by acting ministerially without and wanting jurisdiction on behalf of those presiding in Washington who had handed down the extermination orders. Well, that's the end of that report story. If you want to go and read the whole thing firsthand, here's the reference to Rumor Mill News. I think a lot of your listeners are familiar with Rumor Mills.
Right.
And then it has the contact information, if you like that.
So you're saying that this really, he was targeted because not only did he not pay his taxes, but he was looking to buy more property that they wanted.
No, I didn't say that, not at all.
Oh, I heard you say he was going to buy property.
Well, he bought a farm in North Dakota, apparently, or he was working on a farm. But the whole thing started with him coming on a radio show and explaining to people. I don't know what the radio show said, was it that inflammatory? But anyway, there were 250 calls that had come into the radio station based upon that interview. And then again, going back to Gordon Call's history himself, he was charged with tax evasion when he didn't even make enough money to even file a 1040.
What was he talking about on the?
I don't know. I mean, I've never heard the radio program, but my point is, like we had talked about last week, about this report from Errol, and in consequence of those in the old empire who had objected or even erroneously reported income tax, they put them on Earth as a prison. Now, was Gordon Call one of these? He may have been, I don't know. But anyway, you see the vulgarity. There's once these maniacs. I mean, for crying out loud, they called in Delta Force on this guy.
Well, it depends. Well, I understand. I mean, I don't know what the interview was about, what he was saying, and so you'd have to.
Well, he was probably talking about some of the tax codes and why he was not required. I mean, I don't know what he said. That's immaterial.
But
it's immaterial what he said. But what the point is, he was not even required, but yet he was charged with willful failure to file by the IRS, and then things escalated from there. But to ensure, to keep the illusion going,
right?
U.S. Marshals got after him. They tried to ambush him. Shot his kid. And he retaliated against those who had attempted to murder his son. And he shot a couple of them. Is that self-defense? Yes, it is. And so then he picked up his son and took him to the hospital, and then he fled. So they chased him up into North Dakota, eventually chased him down into Arkansas. They got down into Arkansas. I mean, they sent in the U.S. Marshals, the Delta Force, and the FBI come in and chopped off his hands and his feet and shot him in the head. And he was not even required to file a 1040. What in the world were these people thinking and doing? See, that they had to maintain the illusion to keep all the rest of the sheeple in line.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the news, that went out, about this incident and so forth, certainly did not report what they had done, because if they had it,
yeah,
I would believe that most Americans would be so repulsed. I mean, chop off somebody's hands and their feet when you got them down on the floor, beating them with your rifle butts and knocking out his teeth and breaking bones like the coroner proved. This has got to be one of the worst stories. I mean, we talk about Waco. Now, I have gone back and reviewed Waco, from time to time.
yeah.
And again, that was another one of these kind of things. In Ruby Ridge, the FBI sniper shot a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now, these are murderers. And hopefully, with this draining of the swamp and stuff, all these things will be brought to an end, and the murderers will be prosecuted. The murderers will be prosecuted. Now, there's one other I had referred to last week, another incident. I referred to Bill Cooper.
Right.
I think a lot of your viewers are familiar with Bill. I mean, he put out a lot of stuff. I'm not really sure what the incident. I mean, what had happened was, Bill Cooper, he was hitting them pretty hard for a long time, not only on tax issues, but on UFOs, the cover up, the secrets, and all these kind of things. And he had credibility. He had credibility because what he had been involved in for a long time. So anyway, this story here, I just found this on the internet. You can find all these things, but apparently that they had a couple of the local deputies had gone out to serve some felony warrants on Bill Cooper, and I suspect one of them had to do with IRS taxes. I don't know what the 3 warrants were about. Maybe some of your viewers know more about that than myself. But in any event, they went out to serve these warrants. Anyway, let's see. It says officers down below his home. Officers deliberately caused a ruckus to get him away from his home to create this entrapment. He went down the hill away from his home to the automobile to see what the ruckus was. It was 2 officers in plain clothes. He spoke to them, then got back in his car to go back up to his house. When out of hiding came a patrol car that blocked his return home. He put his hands on the car window, as we assume that is what he was ordered to do. As they approached the car, he pulled out to get around the car. He got out of his car and tried to run for his home. Shots were fired. He returned fire, hitting one officer in the head. And the other officer continued to fire until Cooper was dead. Please keep in mind this report was given to us by the sheriff's office. Blah blah blah. Anyway, again, how do you stop it? How do you stop some of this stuff from going on? Well, they shoot and kill them. Now, going back again to this Lavoy Finicum here in Oregon, I mean, he was associated with trying to peacefully object, to the way things were going on. And I never knew Roy Finicum. I did go down and meet Clive Bundy down in Nevada at one time, but I never met Lavoie. But and Lavoie wrote a book, by the way. Lavoie wrote a novel about perhaps what might happen in the country. It's actually well written for a first time author. I forgot the name of it. You might be able to find it on Amazon. I don't know how many books were actually printed. Anyway, somehow I got a hold of a copy of that and read the book. Pretty well written as an adventure novel. So anyway, there was a convoy of them heading to a certain place to have a meeting about some of the things that they were dealing with the BLM and all that kind of stuff. Again, on a remote roadblock was set up. You can go on the internet, and read about all the different parameters involved with that. But in any event, when it looked like escape was hopeless, Finnegan, to draw attention away from the others in the vehicle, because there were young people and women in the vehicle. And so anyway, Lavoie got out of the vehicle to draw attention away from the others in the vehicle. He did not assault, he did not shoot, but he was shot down in cold blood. Right. Now this kind of thing goes on and on. FBI, Highway Patrol, all these people. What is in their mind? Yeah. What is in their mind that they want to shoot and kill people? This has got to be the awfulest thing in American history. Because I had years and years ago, probably in I think it was the late 70s, when this event occurred in Utah. There was a fellow there who, for his own reasons, had taken his children out of school and put them into a homeschool environment because he disagreed with what was being taught in the public school. And that's perfectly legal in Utah, perfectly legal. But what had happened was the school superintendent, because this was kind of a rural area, but the school superintendent kept the children on the school roll to keep the money flowing, because they were getting paid, X amount of dollars per student. And so
who's getting paid exactly how?
The school system, gets paid on the number of children who are enrolled.
The superintendent.
No, the school system. But the superintendent was falsifying the record, saying that the children of this man were still in school, and they weren't. He had taken them out. And so anyway, when it came audit time, all of a sudden the superintendent has a problem. And so anyway, they get into a legal thing, and they call this individual into a court to answer for for taking his children out of school and putting them in homeschool, which was perfectly legal. And he had about enough of them. And he basically, he just avoided the warrant. And then when things really got hot against him, he just holed up in his country home or his ranch home. And the reason I knew about it, because a lot of the local patriots down in that area were taking in food and supplies to him. I remember during Christmas time, they were gathering up, Christmas presents, to take in so the children would have Christmas. And they were trying to reach some kind of peaceful resolution to it. And the governor of the state, worthless, whatever, pledged that nothing would happen to him, while he was governor. Anyway, on a certain occasion, the governor left the state. They sent in a highway patrolman hitman. And they caught this fellow. He went out to his mailbox to check his mail, and they swooped in on him on snowmobiles and killed him dead. He was shot in the back running away from it because, I talked to a fellow who actually did break into the mortuary and took photographs. And you could see the buckshot wounds in his back. Now, this kind of crap. No, but this is an interesting, and you can read this story. Some of these things you'll never hear about on the internet. This man's name was John Singer, and I went to his funeral. It was quite a touching thing because his brother and he, they were born in Germany. They were born in Nazi Germany. And the family had split up. I guess the father was still in Germany. The mother had gone to New York. And so anyway, they were still in Germany during the war. And, the story the brother told was that that he and his brother John had, I don't know what had happened to the father. Perhaps the father had been killed or something like that in the bombing and so forth. And so I think it was Berlin, where they lived at. And so they were going to try to escape to the west somehow. And as they were walking along, it was said that a German officer found them and told the two young boys, "Follow me." He marched.
They escaped Nazi Germany and come here and are treated even worse. And that's something.
Yeah, this officer marched them across the war zone so they could escape, and eventually they did escape and made it to New York with their mother, and then they came west. So the irony or the tragedy of the story was they had escaped annihilation in Germany, only to be shot in the back. In
America, the land of the free, folks. The land of the free. Listen to what we're talking about. We're talking about the land of the free, and the problem is it's really the land of the stupid because, we didn't learn from Nazi Germany. We didn't learn from it.
Yeah. So anyway, the point, I'm trying to make is that, when we look to things that have happened in the past, is there any reason why we would allow those same kind of things to happen? Now, these are very dramatic and tragic incidents that I have referred to here. Very dramatic, very, disgusting. And some, like I say, I kind of hate to talk about some of these vulgar things that go on, but people should be aware. People should be aware of those who have suffered in this manner, because, like I say, we have a lot of fallen heroes, that simply we'll never pin a medal on them. We never will. But I hate to think that they would sacrifice their lives and not be mentioned. So I do have a memory of some of those things. Like I say, I keep always wondering, just how is it, that I haven't been destroyed. It's an amazement to me. I mean, my mentor, Dr. Ray C. Dam, they tried to poison him to death. And then, like I say, this other attorney that was associated with my appointment, he was shot dead. So, like, why I'm not, why I haven't suffered, a bullet, I don't know. I must have pretty good protection. So the way that they decided to attack me was with the, federal court system. But that's not going to work out too good for them.
Right, not with you, Winston.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to mention, some of those who have gone before. who sacrificed everything. Sacrificed everything. And there's many more in prison right now. I did have a friend, just quickly, uh, he had, yeah, God, stories I could tell. Anyway, he had been a young man. He got drafted into the Army. He was about the same. He wasn't. He was a slight person. I mean, he wasn't very big, but he was about the size and profile of a Vietnamese or a Viet Cong.
Oh, sorry about that.
And so when he got put in the Army, then he got taken into by the CIA, and they completely expunged his Army record as if he had never been there. And so he was into Vietnam, working for the CIA. He got captured. He was captured. It said he was held in what they call a tiger cage, if you know what I'm talking about, for about 9 months. And just luckily, he said, a company of Rangers, Army Rangers, came through and liberated him, or he'd have died there. But anyway, my point of telling this was that after, he was repatriated back to the United States, there's no record of him ever being in the Army. He can't collect any benefits. So he went on with his life and everything, and then eventually he was working, teaching with an organization called Pilot Connection. Some of your viewers may know what that was, but anyway, they were trying to educate people on the IRS and tax issues, and so he was teaching with Pilot Connection. He never received a penny, never received any salary, from his efforts and so forth. Yet he was charged up like the others in Pilot Connection. And so, any event, they went through the whole legal thing, and he appealed and all that kind of stuff. And so he was eventually thrown in prison, and that's where they tried to get rid of him too. They told him, well, you have high blood pressure, you have this, you have that, and they started to administer statin drugs to him, which in normal dosage might have been good for him, but they were giving him 8 times the prescribed dose. And when it says my internet connection is unstable. Anyway, so when we finally got him out, man, he was in bad shape. He didn't die. We got him out, got him to Dr. Scott Werner, and got him fixed up. So like I say, why do people do these things to each other? It's unbelievable. It's unreasonable. It's no wonder the ETs avoid this place. Just because of the vulgar and mean things that people do to each other. Like that Errol said, kindness begets kindness. Conflict begets conflict.
I know, but so many of us didn't come here to be violent. Some of us didn't.
No, we didn't.
Many of us were not violent and came here, for different reasons, and we're suffering. Want to stop the suffering.
Well, like I say, for the shock value, I thought I would tell some of those stories. Like I say, a lot of those incidents and stories have been lost. Like I say, this last time when we were talking about some of these subjects, I had misspoken and said Gordon Hall instead of Gordon Call. So I thought I'd better go up and at least clear that part up. As far as I know, Gordon Hall's, I think he's in jail, but anyway, he's one of the patriots from back in Ohio that's been persecuted and prosecuted by the government. We got a lot of folks in prison right now that need to be liberated.
That's right.
Because they're simply put there on false premises.
Yep.
And it's our good old government, IRS. Now, let me tell you something funny. That was I got a message, on our Solutions in Commerce. one fellow wrote in. I think he must be from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Anyway, he wrote in and said he went past the IRS building the other day. He said there's a big for lease sign on the
Get it?
building.
No way.
Yeah.
That for
He
real,
said,
Winston?
yeah.
Are you
He,
just trying to make us feel better after that story?
he said the whole building had signs plastered all over it for lease.
No
So
way.
yeah, that whole regime is being taken down. Now, will the IRS, still exist, to tax corporations? I would suppose that it might, but this idea of bootstrapping their way into the straw man name to tax corporations, that's coming to an end. Now, this new tax bill, I haven't been able to read it, but that's been passed here by Trump and that bunch. Speaks of reducing corporate tax from 30 whatever percent down to 20% to stimulate business and commerce, but they still don't address the problem with the straw man corporation concept. I don't know how they're going to handle that, but they for damn sure better handle it properly. I mean, some of us are simply sick and tired of stupidity.
Greed. It's because they're making
Stupidity
money.
and greed.
But they're stealing money. How do you convert a thief?
I don't know, but we'll just have to wait and see, what happens. Certainly under NACCURATE, all that individual income tax and all that crap goes away. But as far as what does this new bill that's come out with, how does that deal with the incorrect concept that just because something is spelled in all capital letters that it's a corporation, it can be taxed as such? Are they going to put an end to that? And like I said, they for damn sure better. We're just simply sick and tired of this. I'm not going to have it anymore. And so anyway, just go around to your towns and look on the IRS buildings and see if they got a for rent sign on them. All
IRS
right. Well,
terror organization. Time to take down the IRS terror organization, huh?
that's all that it's been.
Yeah.
Look what happened to Gordon Call.
That's why I call it that.
Look what happened to Bill Cooper. I'm sure one of those warrants had to do with IRS issues. Sure of it. But in any event, we can move on. Like I say, I didn't want to drag everybody down into the mud too much, except to expose. Like I say, here we are in 2018. Gordon Call got killed 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and so a lot of people might not even heard of that. But it's one of the most gruesome stories that it's on an individual basis. Now, certainly at Waco, there were many who suffered that way. And then, like I say, at Ruby Ridge, we had some of that same problem. I forgot how many of Randy Weaver's family were actually killed. I think for sure his son and his wife. And she was standing there holding the baby when this sniper killed her. Can you believe something like that? But anyway, let's go on with some other things. We want to go back over, like I say, I've been shooting around, all over the place, different things. So I thought maybe we'd go back over just a little bit more technology today to see how that works. Because, again, we have a situation, as I had mentioned, in our previous interviews about certain concepts, for instance, the very Declaration of Independence, created a trust situation because anytime the outcome is uncertain, the trust is automatically created. And so again, the people need to conceptualize of our environment, legal environment, and so forth, in our government environment, as a trust. And so how do you operate within a trust? And so just recently, we just did put out a new DVD on our Solutions in Commerce website that you can go to that has to deal with trust and equity, how they interwork, how they interweave, and so forth. And so that would be a good one for people to get to understand the nature of trust, and also to see how to enforce trust law using equity parameters and so forth. So we just put that out finally. Like I say, I had done that, given that information at one of our seminars last, well, I think it's September or something. Then we had some video difficulty with the production, so I had to go and re-record the concepts. Not in a live environment with an audience, but with me talking into the camera, which I hate to do. But anyway, that's now available, for some that would be interested in understanding those concepts. But in any event, as you go through your normal business and interactions and all these kind of things, you're going to run into, and if you avoid it, if you don't recognize it, you're gonna make mistakes. Because I keep hearing so much about, common law and rule of law. And this, I keep hearing all these buzzwords and everything that simply drive me crazy. And so when we start to talk about, our interactions, and today we'll talk about perhaps more in relationship to court interactions, you simply have to conceive of the idea that we're dealing with a trust, and in particular, who has the responsibility in the trust to operate in a particular manner. So that's what I want to go into a little bit today. So let me bring up some of this.
I'm sorry, I'm so quiet over here, but those kinds of stories that you had shared with us is very intense, and they're extremely moving. And I would only hope that, the sad part is that because of the Mockingbird media, it's completely controlled. And
Yeah,
sadly, I have a feeling, Winston, that there are far more of those stories out there that we don't know anything about.
I
And
would have to suppose that's true. Those are the ones that I've known about.
yeah,
What other things have been done in the dark, by some of these entities and so forth is unbelievable. I mean, people, talked about the string of murders associated with the Clintons, and it goes way, way past that.
I,
It goes way, way past the Clintons. For crying out loud, these things have to come to a stop. Everybody was harping and yelling about Trump and the wall. And I look at it from a different point of view. And that is, if people are going to come to the United States, we would want to be able to account for them because of their children. If we, the FBI's own report, 1 million children go missing every year in the United States. I ain't talking about the rest of the world. I'm talking about the United States. 1 million children go missing, and they can only account for about 500 of them. 500,000 of them, or half that amount. There's 500,000 children that went missing this year or last year that we can't account for. Where'd they go? And so if we have, people flooding into the United States that we can't even keep track of, how in the world are we going to protect their children? How are we going to do that? And so, people that, want to, yell and scream about, Trump or whoever that simply wants to keep track of people who come here. It's not about economics. Well, some of it is, but, we also have to keep track of the children, for crying out loud. 1 million go missing every year that they know about. How many children go missing that they don't know about? So I get sick and tired of hearing all this complaining and crying and whining, for crying out loud. Get off of it. I mean, I get sick of it. Anyway, not to be on that particular kick right now. Let's talk about fiduciary responsibilities, as it relates to the public, to the court system, and so forth. Because you remember in the past we had talked about a scope of office,
Mhm.
you know,
Yes.
and the benefit of office. In other words, if somebody takes a job working in government, whether it's local or state or federal or whatever, and they're getting paid for it, how much responsibility do they have to act properly within that scope of office? And so, do they have a fiduciary responsibility to act according to their scope of office? And the answer is yes, they do. And if you don't want to take those responsibilities, don't take the job and don't get a paycheck, go do something else. That's the point. Because once you accept the responsibility, then you have an obligation to act properly. So anyway, talking about this, we have a few things here. This particular first quote comes out of Amger's American Jurisprudence, which is one of our two organic law books. Organic, meaning this is tried. This is tried and true from for centuries. Anyway, going on with this, the fiduciary responsibility says, as expressed otherwise, the powers delegated to a public officer are held in trust for the people and are to be exercised in behalf of the government or of all citizens who may need the intervention of the officer. In other words, if you're, if you call 911 saying there's an intruder in my home and the police don't show up, somebody needs to be fired. See what I mean? But they do have that responsibility.
No,
Because again, they're being hired, they're being paid to do that. And when they don't show up, they're in violation of their fiduciary responsibility.
Winston, I know of a case where this is not the case. It went all the way, it's a horrible case. It went all the way to Supreme Court, and then it went to the Inter-American Human Rights Council, or because I think it's called Inter-American Human Rights Council, because we're not a member of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Isn't that interesting? We're not, United States is not a member of the human rights. And it declared that the police did not have an obligation to protect a woman and her three children uh, from uh, somebody who she had a restraining order against a man who killed her three children. So
Yeah, yeah.
it was a case called Lenahan Gonzalez in state of Colorado. She yeah, and sadly, the state affirmed that there was no legal. She went through the state to the state Supreme Court. It affirmed that there was no legal obligation to protect her. Then it went to the Supreme Court, which affirmed that. Then it went to the Human Rights Council, which affirmed that. And it's no, no. I think the Human Rights Council did find that. I'm not sure. It's an old case. I have to double check it. But I mean, even the Supreme Court of the United States affirmed that the police do not have an obligation to protect you. That's what the case. It's called Lenahan Gonzalez, and people should look it up.
And those people that made those decisions need to go to Leavenworth for treason.
Yeah.
Listen, I mean, aside from legal obligations, the fiduciary responsibility, scope of office, and all those kind of things, our whole system has been based upon the King James Version, and within the King James Version, there's a parable talked about there by Jesus called the Good Samaritan. Now, what is a Samaritan? a Samaritan in their community was somebody with mixed blood.
Hmm.
And so Jesus was pointing out a story about a good Samaritan, because Samaritans generally were looked down upon because of mixed blood. And so the story goes that this good Samaritan came upon an individual who had been set upon by bandits. And he took him and dressed his wounds and took him to the nearest town or inn or something like that. And actually gave the innkeeper money to keep this party until they were well enough to travel on. Now, you know, if in fact everybody runs around, you know, we're a Christian nation based upon the King James Version of the Holy Bible, you're obligated under the Good Samaritan doctrine. I don't give a, pardon me, I just about swore again. And I don't care. I don't care about statutes and codes and laws and all that kind of stuff. I feel obligated as a believer to act in the capacity of Good Samaritan, regardless of any statute, code, scope of office, benefit of office, or any of the rest of it. I feel obligated as a believer to act in the same capacity as this Good Samaritan. You see, you
Yeah.
can't get around that, folks. You can't get around it. I don't give a damn what the statutes say. If you're going to say this is a Christian nation based upon the King James Version of the Holy Bible, then you have the obligation. You can't get away from it. I don't care what the statutes say.
Well, I didn't mean to bring this up to digress or anything, but the problem is, you
You
know
got me
what?
worked up again.
I know, Winston. I do that frequently to you. Um,
Exactly.
the problem is that we really need to have a thorough review of how the system is working, because when you can have you know, people go look, you know, the cases you already discussed, there's no accountability for that. There's no courtroom where anyone's going to be held accountable,
No.
and that's the problem. I mean, this is why it's very frustrating for people who really do wake up and see that this is all an illusion. This is the grand illusion that the Wizard of Oz has created. This is the grand illusion that when you really walk into that courtroom, you're, like you said, Winston, it's not about justice. And so, unless we have an accounting of the process, unless we have somebody going in, so Judicial Watch has done a really great job. There used to be people who used to go into courtrooms and sit there and observe to make sure
Yeah.
that to hold accountable these oath takers who are supposed to be working in, you know, in integrity and following, you know, they're following the laws. And I don't see them any longer. I can tell you one person who came into a courtroom with me once was intimidated by the attorney and in cooperation with the judge, because they didn't want that person there as a witness, even though they had the right to be there. And they did everything they could to intimidate that person, and it didn't work. So it happens. I mean, when you read this, I feel these things within myself, because as I've never talked about on GoldFish Report, I have my own story, and one day I
Yeah.
may be telling it, but I can relate very deeply to many of these stories, because it's, we have to hold the system accountable, and they keep people stupid. And I don't mean stupid in a disparaging way. I mean it,
Uninformed may
I
be a
mean
better
it in
word.
terms of ignorant. Okay, ignorant. Yeah, but when, you know, unless it happens to you, you don't care. You know, people don't care generally unless it happens to them. They don't care what happens to you, and that also has been socially engineered. People used to care about your neighbor. They used to care about each other. Um, I had an elderly woman who lived next door to me when I was growing up, and my mother made sure I, you know, learned to care for, you know, for the
Yeah.
elderly. And every Saturday morning, I would go down to the deli and wait in line for an hour to get her cold cuts and come back, and she'd give me $1. And you know, that's what I did, and I was taught the right way. You know, I was taught that you care about one another, and you know,
Yeah.
and the compensation wasn't, you know, as good as I would have liked, but hey, you know, it was an exchange, and I was doing it because I was being taught. It was the right thing to do. So, okay, I didn't mean to digress too much. I apologize, but I just wanted to say somehow there has to be a way to hold our government accountable, and it's our job to do it. So I just wanted to bring that up. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. But see, this very problem is the downfall of the whole system. For
Mhm.
instance, here in Oregon, you know, I mean, Cliven Bundy was prosecuted here, right here in Portland, and he got a mistrial and walked away from it. But I haven't noticed anybody being hauled into federal court over here for the murder of Lavoy Finicum.
Well, saying we
Haven't
have
seen it.
right, well, saying we have all these rights, and that, you know, we're here to, you know, they're there to protect us from tyranny. That's the illusion.
They are the tyranny.
They are the tyranny, and the problem is, have you ever seen a case where it's been otherwise? Where is it published that, oh, okay, this person did something wrong in the government and they're being held accountable? We're not seeing it anywhere, nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how we know the system doesn't work. We know the system's broken. The system is, in fact, an illusion, because simply just by human factor, there has to be some mistakes being made, and that needs to be published when that happens.
Yeah.
And it's not.
I used to have a lot of fun with them in the court. You know, you go into the courtroom, they got several things happening that day, you know, and all the attorneys clumped together over here, you know, so they can talk to each other and all that kind of stuff. So when I would go to court, I'd go right there and sit right in the middle of them. just to aggravate them. Because they couldn't talk when I was sitting there. I have chewed out some attorneys over the time. I mean, Jiminy Christmas, I heard a couple of attorneys out in the hallway at the courthouse one day. They were laughing at one of their clients. I got right in the middle of them. And I said, you know, I chewed them out for it. I chewed them attorneys out right there on the spot for it, because they were making fun of one of their clients, saying how stupid they were. Jiminy Christmas, you know, I don't put up with that kind of stuff. So, you know, we do have some of these things. Like you say, we used to have, you know, judicial watches, people who come into courtrooms and stuff. Yeah, you can still do that. You can still do that. You know, I gave some examples, you know, like in Ireland, you know, when 200 or 300 people showed up,
Right.
and it stopped. It stopped something that was going on. And so if people, you know, want to participate and things like that, I mean, one time I was sitting, it's actually, you know, that story I told about that code violation story. You know, I just hung around that day to see what was going on. And there was one case, this individual had lost his driver's license, and, you know, through some kind of violations, traffic violations or something. And so the local town was letting him work it off, to pay the ticket, to pay the fine. And so he was a journeyman carpenter, good finish carpenter, and so they were paying him minimum wage as a journeyman carpenter to come and do work for the city. And then, you know, he was caught driving, and so he got brought back into court. So they just upped these fines so they could keep him in slave labor as a journeyman carpenter, paying him minimum wage. And that public defender, you know, did not help him. It was obvious what was going on. And I confronted that public defender out in the hallway, and I read him the riot act, because he had not helped this individual. It was obvious what was going on.
Yeah.
And he hadn't helped him. And so, you know, I don't have a whole lot of respect for people acting in the capacity of an attorney, you know, that do not help. They have a fiduciary responsibility. And, you know, I'm not afraid to confront them over it. So anyway, you know, people that would like to go down and check on what happens in their systems and everything, certainly go with a little bit of knowledge. And that's what I have tried to do, is to educate people to the extent that when they see something that's not just exactly right, you know, that they're in position to recognize it, and then, you know, if they care to, you know, to go and do something about it. Now, that's what we talked about on that one interview about recall. referendums and all those kind of things.
Right.
Yes, there are things that people can do to correct the problem. I mean, you don't have to sit idly by and let all these things happen. I mean, you can't depend on one guy, Trump, to drain the swamp.
Yeah.
For hell's sakes.
You
You
can't
know,
sit you can't sit
no,
on your couch and watch your,
no,
soap operas, eating your
no.
Doritos and Big Macs. You got to get off your butt and you got to do something.
That's it. So what I've tried to do as an educator is give people information, knowledge, techniques, and so forth, that would assist them in fulfilling their responsibilities, their fiduciary responsibilities to the public, to their neighborhood, to their communities, and so forth. So yes, you can. Yes, you can get in there and you can go to work on these things. I mean, I'm not saying give up your job and go start doing all this. What I'm saying is that, yeah, you can be involved, and every little bit helps. Every little bit helps.
Right. Sure does.
Anyway, let's get on with some of this. I don't want
Speaking
to
of
get off.
speaking of fiduciary responsibility.
Yes. Again, what I'm trying to explain is under the Good Samaritan doctrine taught by Jesus. I don't care who you are. You have a fiduciary responsibility to your fellow men. And if you don't fulfill it, you're going to have a few problems because you're going to start create karma that will drag you down. So again, we're just encouraging people, to do all they can. Like this Errol said, kindness begets kindness. And so we need to be kinder and gentler. We don't need to be shooting people and chopping their hands and feet off. For crying out loud.
That's horrible. It's such a terrible.
It's unbelievable.
Very
It's unbelievable that any human being would act that way, to do something like that. Anyway, let's not get off on that. Let's get redirected. I'm going to refocus on kindness. How about that?
Okay, that's good. We need to change the energy, Winston.
We need to change the energy a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, talking about the public trust, public officers, again, who are receiving salaries and so forth, and they have your responsibility. Furthermore, the view has been expressed that all public officers within whatever branch and whatever level of government and whatever their private vocation, anyway, in their public capacity, are trustees of the people. In other words, the people are the beneficiaries. The public officer is the trustee. So that's the relationship that's being talked about here in AMJURS. And accordingly, labor under every disability and prohibition imposed by the law on trustees relative to making a personal financial gain from the discharge of their trust. So what they're talking about here, again, is benefit of office. We're getting paid to do this. If they're getting paid to do it, then they have an obligation to function in their scope of office. That is, a public officer occupies a fiduciary relationship to the political entity on whose behalf he or she serves and emphasize owes a fiduciary duty to the public. It has been said that the fiduciary responsibility of a public officer cannot be less than that of a private individual. Furthermore, it has been stated that any enterprise undertaken by the public official which tends to weaken the public confidence and undermine the sense of security for individual rights is against public policy. In other words, we're not going to have any of these secret meetings. We're wanting transparency, like everybody's, talking about. We want to find out what's going on. And yes, we do want to see that 4-page memo out.
Release the memo. Release the memo.
Yeah.
It's coming out. It's going to be leaked before it comes out, It's going to there's stuff being leaked already. I mean, we saw that 16-point.
Yeah, now we're going to start now we're going to address something known as crimes against justice. And that is fraud in its common law sense of deceit. And this is one of the meanings that fraud bears in the statute. And it quotes the United States case here. Anyway, it includes the concealment of material information in a setting of fiduciary obligation. Jeff Sessions and all the congressmen and all the FBI and all the Department of Justice people are getting a paycheck.
Right.
They have a fiduciary responsibility to the people.
Right, but James Comey,
anyway, I'm just pointing out, the question is, do they have the responsibility to give us the 4-page memo? And the answer is yes, they do.
Right. Let it go.
Yes, they do have that responsibility. And you can call it transparency if you want to. But right here in our law, we have pointed out that they have that responsibility, and they better do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're in breach of fiduciary responsibility and can be prosecuted for it.
Did you hear that? Winston said so. Listen up.
A public official is a fiduciary toward the public, including, in the case of a judge, the litigants who appear before him, and if he deliberately conceals material information from that, he is guilty of fraud.
Got it. I'm clear on that, Winston.
Yeah. Now, in one case that I'm very familiar with, which is mine, in the federal court, in the opening statements, even though I had not used the word, I was explaining to the jury in my opening statement something that is known as jury nullification. And I didn't say jury nullification, but when the judge heard me explaining that, he yelled out in the courtroom, "There will be no jury nullification here." Oops. Oops. If he deliberately conceals material information, he is guilty of fraud.
Did you get to say that? Did you get the rest of that out?
I didn't need to. That was such a dishonorable situation. I don't even want. Someday I'll tell this, like you. Someday we'll tell our story, but not today.
Right.
But what I'm pointing out is on this fiduciary responsibility. If a judge deliberately conceals material information, now this is going on all the time. Up here, that's some of the big news, Hannity and everybody's talking about all these different things that have happened going on there. These individuals have fiduciary responsibilities. And Comey tried to conceal the emails, and this other idiot tried to conceal all these text messages and stuff. They're committing fraud. And they do need to be prosecuted for it.
That's right.
And they will be. Anyway, I just wanted to show this. Now, I want to get into perhaps a little bit of the practicality of some of the things that we're speaking of here, because we're going to run short on time like we usually do.
It's only as of recent, though, because we didn't always run short of time.
Yeah, I wanted to show a technique, that we have talked about in times past. Now, I've told the story in the past, so I don't need to retell it, but we have a technique for appointment of fiduciary that I want to refer to again, so that the viewers will have an idea of how this works.
Okay.
Now, this is in connection with accepted for value.
Okay.
Because what we're doing is we're shifting liability. What most people don't realize is that, no, you're not the defendant in a case, but you're the trustee surety for the defendant because you signed the SS5 form, Social Security 5 form. And so you are construed then to be the fiduciary trustee for the defendant by default. Or in other words, you signed the thing, you're responsible. Okay, so that's the way it's looked at in the first instance. So what we're doing with accepted for value is we're as the settler on that straw man trust, we're going to settle and close, and then as settler and trustee, we're going to settle and close, and then once we've done that, then at that point we're going to go and appoint somebody else under the rules, under their rules. We're going to go and nominate someone else to be the fiduciary trustee for the defendant.
Oh, I just had a thought.
Okay, what's that?
Well, I'll tell you later.
All right.
Sorry.
All right. So here's an example of how we've done appointment of fiduciary.
Mm-hmm.
Now you'll notice on the top here we have changed the standard format, and this is again under Rule 14 of the Federal Rules Civil Procedure, and that is that if after a case is started, if the original defendant, in essence, realizes that someone else is actually responsible for the liability on this case, then they can indicate that, and they can bring that party in as a third party defendant. So John Doe, who got charged, case number such and such, so John Doe got charged, and so the real John Doe did an acceptance for value on the case, and then they went and appointed the attorney for the plaintiff, and you can do that. What people don't realize that any attorney in bar represents all parties. Okay, now you just have to understand that. And the attorneys did it to themselves; they can't complain about it. But in any event, so John Doe, who done the acceptance on the case, he went and appointed, nominated this attorney, Bill Brown, who originally was the attorney for the plaintiff. So he nominated Bill Brown as the fiduciary for the original defendant. So now we've shifted liability, have we not? We've shifted liability away from the real John Doe to an attorney. And so now that attorney becomes the third party defendant. Now, if you look at Rule 9, is it Rule 9? No, Rule 14 in the federal rules, and it'll be in your state rules exact same way. But anyway, what it says is that once a third party defendant has been identified, then either the first plaintiff can prosecute the third party defendant, or John Doe as third party plaintiff can prosecute the third party defendant. So we got the best of all worlds going on here. Anyway, here's an example of our appointment of fiduciary. I didn't write all of this. This was written by another individual, and he gave it to me, and he gave me permission to use it, so I do.
Okay. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And so anyway, so we're coming in as a third party interest intervener. So the real John Doe, the flesh and blood John Doe, is going to come in as a third party interest intervener, and people need to go and look at third party pleading. Technically, if I have an interest, and this happens all the time. I mean, the prime example, I think it was I don't know, some kind of case against Bill Gates or something like that, as I recall. And it was a federal case. I don't know what their crazy stuff was going on. But anyway, another attorney on a completely separate case came in as a third party intervener on the basis that if the case were decided in a certain manner, it would have an adverse effect on his case, which was not a part of the Bill Gates case.
Whoa, okay.
So this attorney came in as a third party interpleader. third-party intervener. And so if there's anything going on in any court in the country that might have an adverse effect on the public, anybody can come in as a third-party intervener.
How do you demonstrate that you have an interest?
To state it. I live in the United States. This is going to have an effect on the United States. I'm coming in as a third-party intervener.
Okay.
Yeah, see, I had years ago, I was helping a fellow, and he was some kind of, it was actually, I think, a patent dispute or something along that line. And he had hired an attorney, and this attorney just doing a terrible job. So he went and fired him. And so he went into the next hearing and talked to the judge, and the judge wouldn't pay any attention to him. He said, "Look, I fired this guy. I'm talking now." And the judge treated him terrible. So he called me up and said what to do about that. I said, well, the next time you go into that court, I said, you announce yourself as a third party intervener. And he did. And the judge took on a whole different attitude toward him. Because he's a third party intervener. He wasn't the defendant in that matter. So anyway, yeah, this third party pleading is an important part, that people need to understand. And so John Doe, the real man, having nominated Bill Brown as the fiduciary, who now becomes a liable party and also becomes the third party defendant. Now John Doe, the real man, is going to come in as a third party intervener, usually under injury. Okay, so anyway, here's the legal words or stuff, people can read through this. A lot of it you might not understand about like this business about see, you don't know that the Secretary of Transportation is actually the trustee for all the U.S. citizens. And so what he's saying here, he's terminating that relationship, Secretary of Treasury, and he's going to nominate this Bill Brown, who is an attorney, who cannot avoid appointment of fiduciary, by the way. He's going to nominate Bill Brown as fiduciary for the John Doe Trust. And so anyway, going on through this, like I say, the language in here was created by somebody far smarter than myself. Well, I did add a little bit to it because I wanted certain things put into it. And you can use a thumbprint if you want to. Anyway, this is just an example of how we go about nominating or appointing, an attorney as the fiduciary for the straw man. You have any questions about that? And I want to go on to another example of how we take the appointment of fiduciary into the case.
Yeah. Let me ask you. So does that mean that when you appoint the attorney, let's say on your opposing case, if you appoint them as a fiduciary, that they can then access that straw man, or they're responsible for
it? They better.
They can access.
You see down here in this paragraph here.
Why would you not want to have control of that yourself? That straw man. Yeah, right. I know why you're laughing, Winston. Okay, so there has to be somebody who accesses that you can't.
Okay, now look at this. Look at the paragraph here. So fiduciary Bill Brown, an attorney, is hereby authorized to use the private exemption of John Doe. Why would you give them authorization to use your private exemption? So they can settle and close the case. They can pay it off. The acceptance for value. If you look at the language on the acceptance, you'll see this. But anyway, Bill Brown is hereby authorized to use the private exemption of John Doe for the adjustment and set off in this instant matter, case number such and such, which is accepted for value and returned for settlement. Fiduciary debtors to issue the appropriate IRS 1099 forms and to be in compliance with all revenue requirements in this matter timely. And then John Doe reserves the right to audit the attorney who's a fiduciary.
Right. If you're the beneficiary, you can.
Yeah. So we use acceptance to settle and close, and then because the courts don't like private individuals doing stuff, so okay, we'll appoint an attorney who has a PhD, he has a JD in law,
Right.
and under Title 42 of the United States Code, he has knowledge of the law, and he can't avoid this. And so we're originally the guy that first wrote this up. He was. I mean, I told that story before. I don't have time to repeat it again. But in essence, what he did, he appointed a public defender as the fiduciary for the straw man, and told him to go settle and close that case, which he did. The way he settled it, he told him, he said, look, he said, what I'll do is I'll put in the petition. He said every month there's one judge in the district that hears uncollectible cases. So he said, I'm going to put in a motion to quash, or what, I don't know what the right word would be, but basically this is an uncollectible. And so this attorney who he appointed fiduciary simply put a petition in the court. This is uncollectible.
Right. It would become that because they can't access your straw man.
Well, you gave him permission to do it, but the way out for the court was to make it an uncollectible.
Got it. Okay.
Just like okay, I'm not going to go into my case. Anyway, all right, so this is an example of appointment of fiduciary. Now, this information and the explanation for all these things, again, is on a single topic DVD that we produced. It's called Civil Court. So these examples and templates are on there, along with a lot better explanation than I have time to give today. So if you're interested in this technology, and many have used this particular technology very effectively. And so it's on that DVD. So if you're interested in learning the technology along with templates, examples, and so forth, that would be the place to for that.
Excellent.
Now, let's get into a real life case along with this same technology.
I just wanted to make sure that viewers understood, if you feel like someone is suing you wrongly, why would you want them to access your straw man account and solve
the
it?
Attorney as fiduciary trustee is going to do it, not them.
No, but what I'm saying is, what if you don't owe the money? Why would you settle if you don't owe? You have to have the facts. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
okay,
somebody, that's called, isn't that called extortion? I mean, not anybody can just, I want to access your straw man, so I'm going to sue you, and you're going to appoint an attorney as fiduciary to pay me off. That's basically what you're saying.
Okay, now it's more okay, to answer that would be a very complicated answer, and I don't have time to answer that particular question today.
Okay.
Let's go on to this other right here so people can see it, because like I say, we're running short on time.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to help viewers understand.
Now, there's a particular technique which is known as specific negative averment.
Right.
People come to court based on deditus assumption, or assumption deditus. In other words, everything that goes on in court is the assumption of a debt. Assumption.
Okay.
Write it down. Assumption.
Got it.
And if you don't overcome the assumption, it will turn into a presumption, and the civil courts can issue judgments based on presumptions. Look the words up. Okay, so when the court case first starts, it's an assumption of a debt. And you have to overcome the assumption and not let it progress into a presumption, because judgment can be rendered based on a presumption, and it has nothing to do with facts or evidence.
Wow.
Okay? That's the way it works.
You're right. That's how it works.
Whether you like it or not, that's the way it works.
Got it.
Okay. Now, one of the techniques that we use is called specific negative averment, where we deny the assumption. Once the assumption has been denied,
Right.
then the party that's making the allegation has to come in with factual proof. Factual proof that the debt exists. So we're taking it out of we're taking it out of the illusion and saying, okay, that was an illusion, that was a fraud, or that was a fiction. Now prove it.
Right.
The technique that is used to cause that to happen is called specific negative averment. It's included in the federal rules in Rule 9C, I think. Yeah, I think it's C. All right, it's a technique known as specific negative averment. We've used it very, very effectively many times.
Mostly in an affidavit, I've seen it there. Is that right, Winston?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
going to get into that part and why we do it that way.
Okay.
But anyway, you'll notice we're doing the same thing here with our heading. That is, we're bringing in Bill Brown as third-party defendant, and we're coming in as a third-party interest intervener. So we can have standing in this case.
Not be understood.
Well,
Don't be understanding. Yeah, I know.
No, we're coming in as third-party interest, so we'll have standing to put things into the court. Now, you could do it another way called amicus curiae, but let's just talk about third-party pleading here instead of that. All right. So any time that a complaint's put in, there has to be an answer to it. You have, under the rules, you have to answer it. A lot of people don't and gets in all kinds of trouble. So anyway, we are going to do an answer and a counterclaim. Counterclaims are mandatory. Remember we talked about double entry bookkeeping?
Yes.
So if you have one side of the T-square, then you have to have the other side. And so if you think about this in the same sense of double entry bookkeeping with the T-square, on one side of the T-square is the complaint. Then on the other side of the T-square is the counterclaim. And you have to have both. In double entry bookkeeping, that's the system we're using, whether you like it or not. That's just what it is. So counterclaims are mandatory. Now, we get into this heading on here. Basically, we're relying upon a court case so that the court cannot look at our form. They have to look at the substance of what we're saying. So they can't just throw it out because they don't like it, because it doesn't conform to some kind of structure. Okay, so that's Haynes v. Kerner. Don't want to go into that. Then we get into some other things here that's quite interesting if you understand this part here, but I won't go into it. What I want to go into for lack of time is the answer. Now, as you had mentioned, we're going to do this in the form of an affidavit. Why do we do affidavit pleading?
Well, because an affidavit is the expression of truth.
In commerce.
In commerce, yes.
Truth is expressed in affidavit.
In commerce, yes.
Otherwise, it's all hearsay. So we're creating an affidavit because, again, in commerce, and all these courts are commercial courts. Obviously, they're all maritime courts. And if you don't believe it, just look at the flag sitting up front.
Right, with
the
orange.
So we're into a admiralty maritime type court. We're in commerce right here. And truth is expressed in the form of affidavits, and an unrebutted affidavit stands as the truth. An unrebutted affidavit stands as the truth.
Right.
Okay? These are important concepts. You just have to understand those things. Yeah. All right, so we're going to go into a answer in using a specific negative averment, and we're going to do it in affidavit form. So here's some of the examples. This was on a particular, I think it was unlawful detainer action that was going on. So here's an example. Affiant denies that the Federal National Mortgage Association exists. He denies that it even exists. Now, what does the other party have to do?
They have to prove it exists.
They have to prove that it exists. And they're going to have to bring in what? Their incorporation papers
Right.
that they incorporated, in this case, in the state of Nevada. They may have, they may not have. You don't know. We have a lot of this. We have a lot of operations going on in all the states, across state lines, and they're not registering in the state they're doing business in. That's illegal.
Yeah, but these judges throw this stuff out. They don't care about
Okay,
these.
let's not talk about these
Okay.
judges and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying
Okay.
to tell people what the
Okay.
right thing is to do and how to
I
do it.
understand. I understand.
Okay, all right. Now, so after it denies that such and such exists, there is not any evidence. Remember how I explained how attorneys come to court, they try to build a house without a footing and foundation under it. They just put a sky hook on their court cases and hope it flies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they bring no evidence of anything.
Right.
All right, so there is not any evidence the Federal National Mortgage Association exists, and affiant believes that not any such evidence does exist. I don't believe that there's any such evidence of that. Okay, now again, we're in affidavit form here. Okay?
But this is not a negative. This almost sounds like a negative averment.
This is negative averment, but
Okay.
let me explain to you.
That's
Okay, so on an affidavit, I'm saying that this thing doesn't exist. So now what does the opposition have to do? They have to bring in an affidavit
right.
with someone who has first-hand knowledge to rebut my affidavit. And can they do that, or would they do it? And the answer is no.
Right. It has to be firsthand knowledge. It can't be hearsay. Exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
All right. So anyway, then we go through all the different allegations or assumptions that was on the original complaint. So we go through each one of them point for point. And there may be some of them we agree with, but as for the most part, it's all just a bunch of baloney, and that's what we're saying. Okay, and then also a lot of people miss this, and that is, on a typical civil case, after they made all their assumptions and allegations and so forth, then they come in with a wherefore, which is a prayer for relief. Don't miss that, because you have to deny the relief also. So affiant denies prayer for judgment against defendant, blah blah blah. It just doesn't exist. So you have to deny everything, and a lot of people miss that. All right, now here's the conclusion of our answer. Affiant, and we're still in affidavit form here. Affiant notices that attorney for plaintiff is foreign to the jurisdiction. Then we go through some of that. And people can just read through it. There's a lot to it. Like I said, we don't have time to go over the whole thing, but notice to the court, we reserve affirmative defenses, and then we under, and again, in affidavit form, here's the relief that we want. In this case here, this court on its own motion ought to dismiss, because again, there's no reason to be here. There's no reason to even be in court. There's no evidence, and we're denying their assumptions. So they're going to have to come back. They're going to have to come back with evidence, sworn, true, correct, and complete, to rebut, and it has to be by someone who has firsthand knowledge that can overcome all this negative environment. God help them, they can't do it. All right, now we go into the counterclaim. Again, you have to balance, you got to balance the T-squares. So on the one hand, you have the complaint. So now you have to come back in with a counterclaim, so you can end up with that zero balance under double entry bookkeeping. This is all the same stuff, folks. It's all double entry bookkeeping. Now, usually when you're asking the court to do something for you, you have to bond the court. So we just write a bond directly into the pleading. So letter of stipulation undertaking, foreign on the record, I, John Doe, am not in receipt of any bond of record to initiate the matter. In other words, the attorney, when he put it in, he didn't put in any particular bond, to indemnify the court. So he's risking his bar card, in essence, is what he's doing. But in any event, there's no bond of record to initiate the thing in the first place. Therefore, I, John Doe, state the following. This is my firm offer. This is my firm offer. to pay any and all costs lost by the court and the respective citizens thereof, to be determined by the appropriate office of the court to indemnify this court and other respective actors. Then you go through. So we're bonding the court on the counterclaim, because we're going to ask the court to do something for us. You need to indemnify the court, or otherwise, why would they do anything for you? I mean, I think we've been over this before. Maybe if we have a chance later on, maybe I could talk a little bit more about that. All right. So now we're still in affidavit here, folks. So our counterclaim is in affidavit form. Our statement of facts, and then we'll go through all the different things that we want to bring in our counterclaim, and in particular in our counterclaim we want to bring in a true bill in commerce. Okay, this is important, because when we destroy their initial complaint, then what's left? Our counterclaim, which they haven't rebutted, for which we're entitled to summary judgment, because when they go into default, then we're entitled to summary judgment. What would the summary judgment be for? In this case right here, $1,304,454.08. All right, so we put in the true bill in commerce. And then we go into, a little bit of notice to the fiduciary Bill Brown. And then we talk about what relief we're asking for. Look at that word ought. This court ought, again, we're talking inequity here.
Saw that.
This court ought to order plaintiff and or plaintiff's attorney jointly and severally to pay over to John Doe the sum of $1.3 million. Now we go into a swearing that we call a commercial swearing. This is one that we've used. It came from Harper Van Dyke. He really emphasizes this. So I, John Doe, on my own unlimited commercial liability, do affirm and say that I've read the above affidavit pleading and do know the contents to be true, correct, and complete, not misleading, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now here's the kicker. And do believe the above stated acts have been committed contrary to law. Now, this is Title 18, Section 4, under misprision of felony. In other words, we're alleging that a crime has been committed here. So this whole thing right here turns into an affidavit for probable cause, for crying out loud. I mean, listen, folks, this is dynamite paperwork. This is dynamite. Now, again, I would suggest, that people want to learn this and study it and so forth, get that DVD on civil court to be put. It don't cost that much. I don't know, it's $95 or $100 or something. I don't know what it is. Go and buy it, study it, learn it. I just have just a few minutes here to explain a lot of these things, but if you want to understand it, put out $100 and go get it. We've used this very, very successfully. The first time I used this technique, I saved a 70-year-old woman on Social Security about $60,000 in credit card charges. And she was on Social Security. And somebody used her credit cards and run up $60,000 on them. And she was stuck with it. So in that, the first time I ever used this particular technique, I was in 2004, using these, very same things that I'm showing right here. I saved that old lady $60,000 judgment, which she never could have paid anyway. She probably had to go into bankruptcy or something. But I saved her that as a good Samaritan. I did this as a good Samaritan because once I found out what was happening, knowing that this lady could certainly not afford an attorney to help her out, I stepped in as a good Samaritan, and by God, I got it solved. And you can do the same thing if you understand it. If you understand these things, I mean, you come upon situations like this all the time. And I'm not a special kind of guy. I mean, I just
Oh,
pick something
Winston,
things out
Winston,
and I try to share
you're
it.
so humble, Winston. Come on, stop that.
Well,
Winston, it's just,
we've had a heck of
you don't
we've had a heck of a good time with some of this stuff.
this is really, you're pretty far out there, Winston. This is,
No, I'm not.
oh,
Oh,
you are. This information it's wild. It really need to study this stuff. You're right. These are
yeah.
dynamite documents. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
it's a dynamite technology, and
Yeah,
like I say, in this case, I used it for Good Samaritan, and I've been teaching this since 2004 for almost 14 years now. I've been teaching this very same thing, and a lot of people have taken it up, and a lot of people have used it, and a lot of people have benefited from
we need to download. We need to own. We need to.
it.
We
Go
need
ahead.
we need to channel Winston when we're in the courtroom. We need downloads, like instant downloads. This is so just I think our viewers understand what I'm saying. It's really a very I
Well,
mean, it
the
takes a long
attorneys
time to study this.
the attorneys are preying upon people.
Yes, they are. Hmm.
And like I say, the first time I used this technology, I mean, I'd put it together in my mind how it should work. And then the first time I used this is actually back before I even started Solutions in Commerce. And so, over a period of a few years, we have been, me and some of my cronies have been looking at this process and thinking about it and saying, how could this be used and so forth. So the first time I got to try it out was as a Good Samaritan to help out somebody who was in trouble, and the attorneys were attacking her.
Hmm.
Said 70 some odd year old woman, and she had gotten frauded by somebody else. And I mean, what do? You just walk away and say, well, that don't concern me. I'll just I'll forget about that. No, you
That's
have
the
to step
problem.
in.
I know, but that's the problem. There's far too many who do, walk
Yeah.
away and
And so if all the people that's
pay it
listening to
forward.
this will learn the technology, just look around your family, your friends, and your community. All the people that are getting ripped off of these damned attorneys, ambulance chase. I'm not saying all attorneys are that way, but we have a preponderance of ambulance chasers running around the country, and how you get them stopped. This is a real good way.
Yeah,
That's all I'm
appoint them
saying.
fiduciary.
Yeah. Anyway, that was the end of the affidavit portion. And
Right.
then we go into a conclusion, and then, certificate of mailing like we would typically do. So again, this is an example of the templates and paperwork and so forth you'll find on that DVD.
Mm.
And so if you're having problems with, attorneys, ambulance chasers, I should say, I shouldn't even say attorneys because there are many honorable. There are many, I mean, I know some who are actually honorable people and do a good job. But there's a bunch of ambulance chasers running around. They're simply preying upon people, and I don't put up with that. And you don't have to either. You don't have to either.
Yeah. Well, there was a report that I shared on our news page about a little practice that goes on between divorce attorneys called churning.
Yeah.
And what happens is the attorneys for both sides obviously get the same financial information, and they immediately know how much they're going to make because they know what they're going to
Of
take from.
course.
It's called churning the case, and the authorities know they do it, and they're all in on it, or they would stop it. But there's no oversight. There's no accountability because there's too much money being made, and this is the root of evil here. Is money.
Well, the next problem is the judges
Mhm.
get 30% of all the money that's brought into the court, just put
Is,
into their retirement fund.
is that an
And so
801k account they call it? Is it
I don't know what it is, but
for
I'm just saying
judges? There's
they
an
get
801k.
30%. And so why would they kick the attorneys out? Because they're bringing money into them.
Right.
So for that 30%, let's say, because again, well, I don't want to get it. Okay, that's another subject, and we don't
I'm
have
getting you
time
worked
for
up,
it.
Winston. I know.
Well, I'm not worked up, but I was going to explain how the courts make money on these civil complaints and stuff.
Maybe
And I've
another.
explained a little bit of that in the past, but maybe at some point we'll go back over that because the courts are in business to make money, and they make it hand over fist by accessing your straw man account. They go to Treasury and get the money, and so when a complaint comes in, with your straw woman or straw man name on there, the court's going to take that because listen, The complaint is a bill of exchange. I understand negotiable instrument law, folks, and any complaint that comes into the court is a bill of exchange. The only question is who's going to be the payee. We know who the payor is. We just, the question is before the court, who's going to be the payee. So what we're using with the appointment of fiduciary, we're shifting who the payee is going to be. It's not going to be me. It's going to be this attorney that I appoint fiduciary.
Yeah. That's the next step.
Well, listen, honestly, there is a lot to understand about how this has worked. Yeah. It has worked.
It has kept us ignorant.
With these changeovers
that
we're experiencing now, all this crap's going to come to an end. In the meantime, we still got to deal with it until we get rid of it. So that's what I'm trying to educate people to, is so they can understand how these things work, so they won't be victimized by it. We don't need to have victims, by these ambulance chasers. And that's all they are. I mean, I confronted a couple of attorneys one day and said, look, you guys need to go out and get an honest job. I said, you're just ripping people off. I said, go out and get a job as a carpenter or a plumber or something. I said, because, just look at the terrible karma they were bringing upon themselves. And, and again, look at their children. How is their conduct as an ambulance chaser affecting their family and their children? What kind of karma are they introducing into their household? This is terrible. This is terrible.
It's interesting you say that, because I can remember, like, even the story of Bruce Lee, that there was some sort of like, what do you call it? I'll call it karma, for lack of a better word, but it was something that somebody did, and it kind of affects your family, and for generations.
It does.
For generations to come. And he was, because of something that someone did previously, he was affected. A previous ancestor. He was affected in a spiritual sense.
We have to break that chain if it happens. And so let's say, for instance, you may have had criminals, or like Al Gore, his ancestors were horse thieves. But if you have had in your DNA past, things that are, perhaps better corrected, then break the chain. You break the chain, and you remove that karma, so it does not pass down, through your DNA, to your children and your children's children. I mean, that is really important. And so, you're right. Maybe some of those things did happen, in Bruce Lee's ancestors, but it's happened in all of ours.
Right, exactly.
If you go back and look at your ancestors, you'll find, things weren't always, just the way they should have been. So break the chain. Break that chain of karma. Get rid of it. And then you project, what you would like for your posterity to have. Now, whether they, key on that, but we certainly do not need to pass on negative karma, to our children and our grandchildren. Just don't need to do that.
All right. Well,
break the chain.
Thank you, Winston. Thanks for this incredible discussion. It was really
incredible. It is, but and I apologize for bringing some of these very graphic things to people's attention, but lest we forget, some of these things simply have to be addressed, so that we do not repeat these things and do not allow others to repeat them. We simply can't have these kind of things happening, because look what a terrible effect it had. I mean, the people that perpetrated that crime on Gordon Call, what have they done to their children? What have they done to their children's children? What have they done to them? And they're innocent victims of that. So we simply cannot, repeat these kind of things. And sometimes you just have to be just a little bit graphic to show the situation as it truly was. And it all started out with prosecution by the IRS against someone who was not even required to file a 1040. And he was murdered. And then, I mean, how many people died from that? I mean, you know, his son almost died from it. Certainly, those two marshals who Gordon Call killed, he did kill them. He shot them to death because they shot his kid. They were trying to kill him, so he was in self-defense. And then finally, he was chased down by a bunch of Delta Force and FBI and all kinds of things, and they mutilated his body. That is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in my life. Disgusting. All right, so, but my point is, okay, we've seen what terrible thing it is. Put it aside, and you decide that I am not going to repeat that, and I will not allow those things to be repeated in my community, in my state, in my country. We're not going to have that kind of thing. And so little by little, you know, through public awareness and so forth,
right,
you know, we're able to correct some of these things, but you can't correct a problem until you know what the problem is. So that's my point. So I'm, like I say, I'm sorry, apologize for having to be so graphic, but I felt like it was necessary.
Well, thanks, Winston. No, we have to understand the gravity of it, or it's not going to motivate, you know, anyone to change. I think it was, you know, who was it? George Orwell just said, "Don't let it happen." You know, I mean, this was a very very moving discussion that we had today, and without the truth, which is always hidden. I mean, they don't want the truth to be out because of this reason. People would not tolerate it. So we have to decide if this is because you know, there's also another saying that by the time they come for you, it'll be too late to do anything about it. You have to decide this is unacceptable, not only for yourself, but it's unacceptable for your neighbor. So, because it will not stop at your neighbor. That's
No,
why. That's why. And that's why we have to do this collectively, and we have to decide ourselves. We don't need the government telling us what is acceptable for us. We have the power under the Declaration of Independence to do this, unless, you know, that's an illusion too. And I don't think that it is. So I think that we have a responsibility as American citizens, for those of our viewers who are watching in the United States, we have a responsibility and we have an opportunity because of the Declaration of Independence to do this. And it would really, it would be a shame, Winston, for us to, and it's not that it's our fault. I mean, we've been socially engineered to be ignorant. And I mean, I don't mean everyone who is unaware is stupid. I wasn't trying to imply that before. I was trying to imply the ignorance, which is just the lack of knowledge. But there are definitely some people who are stupid, knowing that this is what's going on, knowing, and they don't care. They'd rather just sit back, and not that there's a lot of those people, but they do exist, and those are the ones that are holding, in my opinion, holding back our progress. But anyway, I'm not talking about our viewers.
Okay, just on a quick note, to end, I got another Irish joke here. Just very apropos.
Okay.
So we can have a little chuckle at the end here. So it says, I met a man the other day named Flanagan, and I said, "You're a happy man." He said, "I am." I said, "Why?" Well, he said, "The income tax people have been after me for 20 years, driving me mad to get money out of me, driving me crazy with worry. But this morning, I got a letter from them, and it's final notice. Thank God," Flanagan said, "I won't be hearing from them again." All the Irish, what can you say?
Yeah. That's pretty good. No, you know what I liked? I liked your list. My favorite was your list of how to start a fight. That's the best. I want you to repeat that sometime, because I just was cracking up over that. Those are my favorite ones to retell to people, like at dinner or something like that.
Well, I just felt like I didn't want to end on a negative note. Maybe have another little chuckle before we quit.
That's good. Well, look, folks, viewers, and again, our viewers, we always have to remember that there's always new viewers who are coming to join Goldfish Report, and we'd like to also, keep that in mind. So there's times when, we may say something that you may have heard before, or it may sound like, and I'm not lecturing you or anybody. That's not my job. My job is to provide information and help connect dots. Um, I do rarely, but I express my opinion about things occasionally. And we're all right to be quite fed up with the lack of check and balances that are supposed to be built into our system, and it's either through abuse of process, it's just being ignored, and people are being harmed, and as you rightly said, Winston. So we're being preyed upon, and we need to stop it, but we can only do it collectively. So folks, just know that Facebook is almost literally, decimated our exposure. So I think we would really be grateful. You could participate in what we're doing and help share this information, spread it far and wide, share it to your groups on Facebook. Share it to your blogger friends, as we do as well. We have a really great group of blogger friends that we share our stories and our reports with. Follow us on Twitter. We do retweet this and many, many other news stories, and also on our blog as well at thegoldfishreport.wordpress.com. You can also, obviously, our reports are always on our YouTube page. Subscribe to our YouTube page and click on that button to get your notifications of when our new reports come out. And having said that, we will be back next week, Winston, with another edition of Country Roads. Isn't that right?
Yeah, we'll have some more hillbilly or Irish jokes to tell.
Okay, you're going to show me that ham bone. I know one of these days. I
Well,
almost
I
got
don't
some this
know.
weekend.
Yeah. Okay.
So, folks, and also a reminder that Jim Fetzer is going to be giving a speech, several presentations in Oregon this weekend. So you can go to our last Goldfish Report, our POTUS report for Monday, and look in the description section. You might have to click see more, and then you'll have the list of where Jim's going to appear if you want to attend those conferences. So having said that, Winston, it was good to see you. I'll see you back next week. And
Okay. Well, y'all come back and see us again real soon. Now, you hear?
okay, and we'll be doing our POTUS on Tuesday next week instead of Monday because of Jim's conference schedule. So we will see everybody on Tuesday next week for POTUS report. We're going to give some feedback about that State of the Union address, and hopefully by then that memo will be released, and we'll have then so much to talk about. So I wish everybody to have a great weekend, and this concludes this edition of the Goldfish Report.